Hi, everybody, and welcome to Coffin Talk, interviews with the living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week, our guest is Nikki Smith. She's an INELDA certified death doula and grief coach, serving the terminally ill, dying, elderly, and their loved ones with dignity and respect. Her goal is to help others embrace the end of life and share open and honest communication with their loved ones. She can take the burden and hold space so you can focus on what matters most in your final days and leave this world at peace. There will be plenty of notes for how to find her and everything, but NikkiTheDeathDoula.com, if for those of you listening, real easy to type in and you will not go to the wrong page. And with no further delays, Nikki, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. And I cannot wait to ask a death doula every single question I've ever wanted to ask about death and doulas and all that. And I love
Yeah.
your spirit and your energy and your attitude. So, as you know, we have the requisite three questions, which is how old are
Yes.
you? Where did you grow up? And what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
Yeah. So I'm 47 years old. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. And as I phrase it, I am so Gen X, your mom.
Nice. I love it. Do you know that someone just told me this. Gen Z uses Ohio as a term now. Have you heard
Oh,
this?
God, do they?
Yeah, so Ohio is a way to describe anything that's like incredibly bland and mediocre and not good. I'm not making this up.
No, that tracks.
Yeah, I went to Pitt, so the Ohio fake
Not
rivalry is
offended
like
by that
in
at
there.
all.
Yeah, but and yeah, I tend to side with Gen X and everything, but w- do you care about the generation question? Do you have any like feelings about that? Like how does that affect you at all?
I mean, yes, but no, not really. Like on a personal level, I don't care. We're all just human beings.
Hmm.
Um, but when it comes to, especially with my work or when I'm interacting with other human beings, kind of understanding where they have come from and what they grew up learning, knowing, experiencing, and what their history, like the history that they lived through, understanding all that helps me understand them as a person a whole lot better. But the whole like Gen X versus millennial and like I don't care about any of that.
Cool. And I'm glad you kind of tracked with why I'm asking, which is I'm curious about clientele. Are you
Yeah.
seeing like are Gen Zs or younger people asking about your services? Is it mostly older like boomer generation? Like what is there any profile or is it all ages?
So it's kind of all ages, but it seems to be the people I've worked with the most are baby boomer generations and Gen Z.
Okay. Wow.
And Gen Z more for the grief aspect, because as a society, as a culture, we're just kind of starting to talk about grief and death and dying because for so long we didn't do that. And I have a lot of theories and reasonings on as to why. I'd be happy to get into if you
Oh,
want,
I
but
would love you to get into that. You can just
you
start
know,
right now.
okay, sure.
Yeah.
So if you think about so hundreds of years ago when we did death and dying funerals, all that, we just did it in our homes. We did it as families, we did it as communities. Um, there were no funeral parlors. This was just we just did this ourselves. So it was part of everyday life. And as so the modern funeral industry as we know it now kind of started around the Civil War. And that is begin you may know this, some of your listeners may know this, but just in case, um, embalming started because of the Civil War, because there were soldiers that were dying on the fields. Their families wanted to have them come home and be buried in their family plots. And there was a doctor who came up with trial and error, tried some different techniques with formulas of chemicals to help preserve the body so that they could be taken home and their families could see them one last time and then bury them in their family grounds. Um, so that is how that started. And once that started happening, it turned like anything, like, hey, I can make money off this. And it turned into an industry. Um, Also, as we've evolved in our culture, we don't live three or four generations in a home, and we don't always stay in the same communities like we used to. We're way more nomadic and spread out. So the way we used to do things isn't as practical. But given that, so when we started giving our dying and our dead off to other people to care for, it kind of fell out of our nature. We just don't deal with it. So we don't talk about it. We don't see it every day. And with that, I don't know where this started, but funeral directors started saying it's not healthy for children to be part of funerals and to leave the children at home. And that started around the early, like late greater generation into early baby boomer generation. So we have this whole generation of people who were told that death is something that somebody else deals with. It's for adults, kids, and it was a mystery. It was weird, and nobody knew how to talk about it. So that's kind of my thoughts and theories therein as to, why we're so removed from it and why I'm starting to see a shift back into it. So we've got that generation that doesn't know what the heck they're doing and that generation that wants to learn what to do. So,
Yeah. Wow,
yeah.
that was a great answer. And while I did know some of that, I have never had anyone explain it so eloquently and quickly and linearly. So that was awesome because I think I always struggle with this. Everything has value, but like poaching and taking more of your than your value is technically necessary or worth is always difficult for me. So it's hard to explain, but like I see a great need for a death doula in our culture, and I see a need for it. I'm not saying that it's like a optional thing for the wealthy.
Mhm.
With that said, I don't see a need for embalming, but if someone sees a need for it, I'm okay with it. So it's
Sure.
always hard. I just had two friends lose. One lost his father very suddenly, and one lost his mother not suddenly, but both had to go through the funeral process, and both of them amidst all their grief, they said, it's also really shitty the way they just bilk us and like, upsell
Yeah.
and then I've interviewed funeral directors who even like lightly step around that. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, do you ever get and I'm asking this because I like your attitude and I like you, so I'm assuming you have, and I'm hoping you have a good answer for this. Has anyone ever like attacked you as like, well, you're part of the aggressive, like taking money thing? Has that come up? Do you ever have to deal with like any perception of that?
I personally have not yet. I'm going to
Uh-huh.
knock myself
Yeah,
on
yeah,
wood and
yeah.
hope I don't. However, there have been two large litigation cases against death doulas in the United States in the past few months. And I don't know if you heard about these.
No, I did not.
One of them was a young lady just in Indiana, the state to my west, and she was sued with a cease and desist order from the funeral trade in her state because they said she was trying to practice as a funeral director without a license, which she was not doing. She was just letting people know, hey, here's some options for end of life care. That was it. She even had pamphlets for funeral homes. Like, here's some funeral homes I've vetted that are great. You might want to consider these. Here's what they do. Here's how that works. And they were threatened by that. And that was the second time. The first time was a practice out in California. Very similar situation. They were offering to help aid people in taking care of their dead at home. They weren't even listing it as home funerals. They were just, and this is all perfectly legal, by the way. You're allowed to take care of your deceased loved ones in your home. And she was also sued by the funeral industry. Both of those have either been thrown out or set aside. Nobody has been put to jail for that, but their licenses were threatened, and that's their livelihood and their business. So
I mean,
I, yeah,
yeah, that's utterly shocking to me. It's also not shocking once you explained it because I grew up in America and I'm 43 and you're 47 and we are
yeah,
pretty used to this. I also think that this is kind of why America is going the way it's going. Like, I
yeah,
think that people are rooting against our culture, not against us as people. I don't think that's true,
yeah,
but I
yeah,
do think
yeah.
the world is tired of this, and so it's
Mhm,
interesting because, like, yeah, I don't think. First of all, I don't think you should need a license because I
mhm.
don't think that makes any sense, and it's not that like are you like doing medicine like is there's no like malpractice with a death tool in my
Yeah,
opinion. What would you say is like the shortest description of a death doula if like you're like it's just the end of the airplane ride and you've already taxied and you just have to get off?
yeah.
What do you say to people?
So my like two sentence
Yeah,
description
like
is
the
just
shortest one because
yeah.
I the longer one's great, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I will just say I provide non-medical and holistic support for the dying and their loved ones and the bereaved to help them navigate all things end of life and bereavement. So
Awesome.
there you go.
That's that's great, and that's enough for me to ask the next like 20 or 30 questions on
Yeah.
that. And I do want to get into what do you think happens when you die. And sometimes I've
Yeah.
been asking it earlier in the episodes, but with you, I kind of want to wait a little bit because I want to flesh out like what you're doing first, and then kind of maybe
Yeah.
backtrack it. So, I guess my next immediate question would be, what do you do like inherently as you, like Nikki Smith, who grew up and became you? Like,
Yeah.
why are you doing this? So, not, I mean, you can tell me why you became one or how you became one,
Yeah.
but I'm actually more curious about like the soul element of you, like just the like part of you that just
Mhm.
is you.
Yeah. I have always been a very compassionate human being and also very okay, since I'm Gen X, I can share this. Like I was one of those people that I was always told you're too emotional and you get too wrapped up in things. And I'm empathetic. I'm an empath for sure. So I take on, and I've learned how to like not hold other people's emotions in. But I'm just one of those people that I can read emotions real well. Like this type of work comes so naturally to me. I can look at somebody who is completely not responsive and tell if they're agitated or if they're really peaceful or if something might be there that they need to get through. So all of this stuff just comes naturally to me and it always has. I've been doing this forever. I've only been at this for like 4.5 years or so. But prior to this, I volunteered at the suicide hotline. I volunteered in nursing homes, hospices. Like I've always felt good and passionate about this. And I've never been like eked out by death and dying. Like that's never bothered me to sit and watch somebody die.
It's very similar. And yeah, it's funny. I was actually gonna write a whole essay about this, but like insensitive people have convinced sensitive people there's something wrong with being
Oh
sensitive.
yeah.
And it's
Mhm.
interesting because sensitive people don't want to fight back against insensitive people. We don't, well, that's not like
Yeah.
our role, but at the same time, it's not that I think there's something wrong with being insensitive either. It's just I wish
Yeah.
both camps could peacefully understand that we're like yins and
Mhm.
yangs to the whole human experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With that said, um, how do you deal with being an empath, with having empathy for people who have no empathy? How is your struggle with that? Because that's something I'm only able to ask someone like
Yeah.
you.
It is really hard because and honestly, the people who really just have zero empathy or even ability to have much sympathy scare the hell out of me,
Yeah.
to be blunt. Like those people really scare me. I'm like, how can you look at somebody suffering or somebody struggling and be like, whatever, that's their fault? Like, and that's still something I work on all the time is not holding all that in and not feeling so scared and wigged out and whatever you want to say about that. I have to just understand that they probably have their own reasonings for that. That might have been the culture they grew up in, that might have been the household they grew up in. There's a million reasons why they don't have the empathy that I do and that other people do. So and with that comes just a little bit of compassion. I have to
Yeah.
have a little bit of compassion for people that really irritate the crap out of
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Well, that's kind of, I mean, the meta issues going on in the world, not just America, but all over the world, is kind of this, which is like, how do you have compassion for people who seem to have no compassion for you, and vice versa, and blah blah blah. But my next question, that's more direct to the occupation of a death doula: do
Yeah.
you allow, or has anyone ever like hired you for someone else, and then you have to awkwardly like go in and tell them like, hey, your brother said grief is like a problem for you, so I'm here to like help you? Has that happened?
So I have been hired by other people, but whenever anybody contacts me and they want to hire me for somebody else, the first thing I ask them is, do they know that you're contacting me and are they comfortable with that?
Okay.
And if they say no, I'm like, we can continue this conversation, but I'm not going to work with somebody until I know that they're comfortable with me working with them and they know who I am and what I'm doing. That said, I have one time had somebody hired me for their mother, and the mother's husband, their stepfather, um, they weren't comfortable. Even the woman was not comfortable with him knowing what I did. So I was just a companion. Um, I think the term death doula, I think they were like, I don't think he's going to take that well because he was really struggling with accepting that she was dying. He was insistent she was going to get better up until the very end. So, and I was okay with that. I don't want to sneak around. I don't want to lie, but if in a situation like that, I'm comfortable with just rephrasing my title a little bit. So,
Yeah, it's interesting because we both did hospice, and there are those freak cases where, like, I remember this one woman was supposed to die within like 3 months of being admitted, and like 2 years later, she was getting released. And I don't know if
mhm,
she actually died or not because of HIPAA, but
yeah,
even if she did die, it still was like preposterous. And so like it's weird because I think I'd rather have people believe and be optimistic and hope and pray than have people like be fatalistic and from the start, say like, well,
yeah,
this diagnosis said 33%, and usually I lose even in blackjack when it's 33%, so I'm out. Yeah, so I mean,
yeah.
like I see all that positivity. Were you religious growing up? Are you religious now? And does religion ever play a role? Like, do you ever like, do you have to like dress differently for different clients? Do you have to like any of that kind of stuff?
So I was raised Methodist Christian. I d- we were a Christian household. I don't want to say we were like super religious because, there's levels of Christianity. We went to church every Sunday, and, it wasn't just on Easter and Christmas. We went every Sunday.
Cool.
Am I still religious now? I never know how to answer that question because not really. I don't go to church every Sunday. I do, and I'm not even sure every day, from day to day, what I believe. It changes constantly. I am a very deeply spiritual person, which I feel like that's such a cop-out answer to say I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual.
Because we're Gen X, that's why. But
it's
a good answer.
It's who we are.
Yeah.
But I love studying different spiritualities and different ideals and concepts. And I started attending a Sangha, which is a group typically around Thich Nhat Hanh teachings and mindfulness. And it's not about Buddhist religion. It's not about religion because everybody in our group has all different backgrounds and all different beliefs. We just come together to be a community, which is part of what I feel church should be in anyway. It should be community.
Yeah.
So.
And so, no, that was a good answer.
Yeah.
I'm curious because I think part of my job to interview is just to literally find out what a death doula does and make it clearer to people. So, and then I still want to get into like metaphysics and philosophy. So I'm just explaining to you as I get into like the end of this portion of the interview. I am curious, do you think some religions will be using in the future death doulas more or less? Do Catholic people think that it's not okay with the Bible? Like, do they see only a pastor should come in at the end, like that kind of stuff?
That's a really good question. I don't have a firm answer myself. And as far as whom I've worked with people of all different backgrounds.
Cool.
I have not worked with anybody who is Catholic. So I don't know what that says about that. And this is just me spitballing my ideas out there. I can see what you're saying with a lot of people of the Catholic faith, nope, we got this. We'll handle this. We know what we're doing. We don't need anybody to help. But I've had people who are Christian, atheist, Jewish, Buddhist. So I've had all sorts of different backgrounds, except for Catholic at this point. I haven't worked with anybody who's Muslim yet either. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. And that was kind of why I asked. And I think the other burning question in my mind is kind of to what extent would you refer someone to a professional? Like if the grief, so I speak about this enough freely that I'll just mention it briefly, but I'm not in contact with my son, and it's not a good situation, nor one that I wanted. I fought against it very hard, but at this point I don't see him and I have no contact. So I have a permanent state of grief, which is missing someone who's not dead, and I just pray will return, and actually think will, because every story like that ends with the child seeking out the person who was blocked from their life. But with that said, the grief I feel is horrendous, and I don't really know how to deal with it. And I tried paying professionals, but they all told me the same thing, which is grief is unique and you have to blah, blah, blah. So your job is actually makes sense to me because it's the heightened moment where grief starts. And if you're overwhelmed by grief, you're screwed. You're never going to make it out alive. So, do you feel like you, to my audience, can explain the difference between healthy grief, you're doing okay, versus oh man, you really need to actually do more than just talk about it with a friend? Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
If it's impacting your daily life, if you can't go to work, if you can't get out of bed for a prolonged period of time, I would suggest that's when it's time to speak to a professional. And like you said, everybody's going to experience it differently. Everybody's journey is unique, and there's no right or wrong way to grieve. I will always say that. And I always hesitate to use black and white terminology like right and wrong. The only things, and good and bad. I mean, if you're hurting other people because of your grief, that's not ideal. That's less than an ideal situation. And if you're fighting yourself, losing friends and lashing out at loved ones and getting into fights in bars or whatever, or, using bad coping mechanisms like drinking and gambling, if that's how you're coping, then you probably need a little extra level of help. And with that said, when it comes to my grief work, I always encourage people that we all hear it now. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay to ask for help. But whatever you're feeling is totally valid. And I have people say things to me like, I was actually really happy when mom died. I must be crazy. I'm like, no, 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 no. That is so normal. You'd be surprised
Yeah.
how many people feel relief or joy. Like, whatever you're feeling, it's valid. It's just what you do with it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I started smiling just because I heard it recently. Again, like
Yeah.
it's and I got it because especially working in hospice specifically with dementia, like
Mhm.
that's a struggle. Like dealing with someone who
Yeah.
isn't really the person you fell in love with, love, knew, and like
Yeah.
and just
Yeah, that situation in particular, there's anticipatory grief of the death, but then there's griefs along the way of the diagnosis, the loss, you're now suffering the loss of the future you thought you had. And then they start to lose some body function. So then there's the loss of their bodily autonomy. And then they don't recognize you anymore. There's a loss of them as who they were when you knew them originally. And there's just all these little losses all the way up to their death.
and then these are the two silly questions, and this will end the death doula portion of the interview. And then I'm going
Okay.
to immediately ask you, what do you think happens when you die? So
Oh
just to
God.
give you advance notice that that's coming right
Okay.
around the corner. And I ask all therapists this question, and so since I put you in that the file of like I deal with emotional people, my two questions are very opposite. One, have you ever had to fire a client? And two,
Hmm.
has a client ever become like a friend after the process?
I've never had to fire a client, but I did have one that I had to refer out to a licensed. I'm not a licensed therapist,
Mhm.
and I did have to refer them out because there was trauma involved that I was not comfortable addressing because
Okay.
I don't have that background. It was very amicable. She was fine with it. She understood. She still continued to work with me, but she did go see the therapist I referred her to as well. Which a lot of the people I work with when I do grief coaching, they're seeing therapists too. So sometimes it's nice to have two different, viewpoints on that. So, and then I have had clients that were friends beforehand.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but I haven't like remained friends. I remain in contact in some way, shape, or form with my clients as best I can. I'll send cards out on like Mother's Day, Father's Day if they lost their mother or father, the anniversary of the death, and I'll just periodically check in and make sure they're okay and they don't need anything further from me if they're adjusting to their new life without their person.
Yeah, that's the reason I ask therapists, especially, is like I feel like something people talk about in a negative way that I don't care about is like, oh, therapists keep milking clients to come back for more sessions. I don't care
Mhm.
about that argument. I don't even believe it. What I do believe though is clients get attached to therapists and just keep
Mhm.
paying because they want the friendship, and then it might be awkward on both ends. And I could see in a time of need someone who's as warm, empathetic, and caring as you, and you
Mhm.
smile and you're like affected but not affected the same way. And I'm
Yeah.
not even talking about a crush. I'm not going in that direction. Just
Sure, sure,
literally
sure.
like is the breakup hard? Like is the end of the like session, like how does that work? And then again, we are going into the next part. So
Yeah, not especially. And
okay.
there is one client we email back and forth all the time. So I don't know if that would consider us friends or not, but we still communicate quite a bit. Every now and then though, she'll be like, "Yeah, I think I want to pay you for another couple sessions." So I'll be her grief coach again. But for the most part, I have and like I don't have a specific end date like this is when my services stop. I will tell them I will continue on as long as you need me.
Mhm.
And I leave that up to them to decide when they are done. So at that point, usually I either get a thank you so much, you've been amazing. I think we're okay from here. And I give them my card and say, if you ever need me down the road, please call me. Your door's always open for any client I've ever served. So,
That's awesome. And I lied. I did a new question came to mind only
okay.
because I've lost dogs and it's the hardest. It's actually the
Yep.
hardest grief for me. How do people hire you for pets?
Yep. Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
cool, cool.
Hmm.
That's awesome. That's
Absolutely.
oh man, I just that thank you.
I know. I know.
Just on behalf of like, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we could do a whole other episode on pet loss, but
I will have you back for that actually. I seriously will. That would
okay.
be awesome. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're booked. I'll probably do that the paywall version or something just because that'll
Yeah.
get you on quicker. All right. So here we go. With no further delay, drum
Oh,
roll.
God.
What do you think happens when you die?
See, and I knew you were going to ask me this question, and I hate answering this question because I don't have a good answer for this, and I don't want to seem like a cop out, like I just don't know because I just don't know. I have ideas, I have hopes. If you had told me I had to say something, I would. Our physical body dies, but everything that makes us us if okay, so let's think of it this way. And I was given this analogy before, so this isn't original. This is Thich Nhat Hanh. If you think of a match, you've got a piece of wood, you have sulfur, you have whatever else is in the little tip, and then you have a strike pad. And when all of those things come together, you get a flame. And when the flame is gone, all those things are still there. They're just in a different form. So I view us kind of like that. We have all these millions of things in the universe came together in just one magical form to make us us. And then at some point, our body dies and all those things go back out into the universe again.
I like that answer a lot. Actually, I would say I love that answer, and the part of it that I want to know your opinion of would
Mhm.
be, were you more or all equally parts of the parts that made the flame?
Oh, that's a good question. I
In your
don't,
opinion, just your opinion. Yeah.
in
Well,
my
what
opinion,
came to mind? What intuitively was your answer?
yeah, I feel like all the things that come together are us. And
Okay.
then, yeah, and it, using that same analogy, like then the smoke that becomes of it that goes out, the wood, all of those, the wood gets thrown on the ground, it biodegrades and it turns into soil, which grows a tree. And so that wood is still there, it's just in a new form. All those things that make me are still going to be there, but they're going to attach to different things and become different things.
So, do you believe that we can speak to the dead, that their consciousness remains, or do you think that that's like a wishful
Ah,
but not realistic? I can
You know,
see what you.
there, because I'm a bit of a science person too, and part
Yeah,
of me
yeah.
wants to say no, but I have seen and experienced and heard many other stories from things people have seen and experienced that are very contrary to that. So I feel like some part of or even if it's just a piece of our energy, will stay alive, especially if it comes to like a sudden loss or something traumatic. That's just that one thing that's just stuck there and refuses to dissipate. I feel like that can be something that stays around.
So that was going to be my next question. I'm actually going to bury it and add it later, which is what's the
Okay.
most supernatural experience you've ever actually experienced? Meaning like something you
Ooh.
can't describe with science. So keep that in your mind. But the
Okay.
very direct question I want to ask is, have you ever? Oh no, I think I just forgot it. Hold on. Let me just give me 1 second. I hate
Yeah,
whenever
yeah.
I announce that I'm going to save a question. This always happens. Um, oh yeah, what was your earliest experience with death?
Um, so probably I had, hamsters growing up and they, at one point or another would die. So those were probably my first real experiences with something dying.
Mhm.
As far as people, my grandmother, no, I take that back. My cousin had a child who only lived about a few months and died. So it was a infant death. And then my grandmother died when I was relatively young. So those were probably my first real experiences with death.
And it's interesting that you like struggle to remember in a good way because
Mhm.
it clearly wasn't phenomenal. So is there no like the event that made you like the death conscious? Because again, I like you, I was just always good at dealing with death. Like
Yeah.
only in reverse can I say that. It's not something I
Yeah.
knew as my life unfolded. So
Yeah.
I'm more asking like I guess now in reverse, is there like a
Yeah.
pivotal moment that you're like, "Oh, that's when Nikki like knew she had a skill."
Um, I ge- I put a lot of emphasis on who I am now and what I do, especially with grief work around the death of my brother. He died unexpectedly. It'll be 10 years ago next month. And I wasn't, his death, like I said, was sudden and unexpected. So I wasn't around for the dying process. But when he died, something in my brain kind of made sense of I can help. Like, and it's good but bad because when he died, I didn't think to grieve. And this is where a lot of the lessons I learned about grief came in because I was like, all right, I need to take care of my parents because they just lost their son. He had two young children. I was like, I need to be there for these two beautiful young children. They're going to have to like graduate and get married and have both of them, his niece and my niece and my nephew are both expecting their first children. So like grandchildren will be happening and like they have to go through these things without their father. So I have to step in and take care of it, which I now learned, or I learned about 4 years afterwards that was terrible because I didn't realize that I should grieve too. And it kind of came out in a very bad way for me. So I learned a lot about death through my experiences after he had died. My mother-in-law died the same year, also unexpectedly. So having to cope with helping my husband with his grief and his loss, because he and his mom she was very young when she had him. So they grew up together. They were besties. So like having to help him navigate that loss, I think a lot of that is when it started to kind of make more sense to me. Because even prior to that, I had heard of death doulas. I knew what it was. And I always thought that seemed like kind of a neat thing. But once I started experiencing more about death, I was like, okay, this is probably where I need to be moving.
What is I'm asking this as a fellow, like, we have an awkward story that occasionally comes up. So, like, someone says, like, oh, what are your daughter's names? Like, are those your only kids or something? And then I have to bring
Mhm.
up, like, my son. And then I'm, like, worried they're going to ask because here's where my question is coming from. When they ask, then I have to decide, like, how much do I lie? Like, how much do I not make them
Mhm.
feel sorry for me? Because I'm tired of, like, the look in people's eyes. So, like, when you told me that story, like, I just felt so bad,
Mhm.
it's, and you know what I'm describing. It's just
Yeah.
like,
Oh yeah.
it's like always going to be sad. When you tell that story in your 70s, it's still going to be just as
Yeah.
brutal. Like it will
Yeah.
never. What is the appropriate response that you think people should say to you when you say, like, my brother unexpectedly passed away 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but, just any.
I mean, there's no real uh, correct answer to that. Like, I would say at least acknowledging that you recognize that I now have, I'm the only surviving child of my parents, or just like I'm sorry that happened. I
Mhm.
you don't The last thing I want though is the whole like, oh my God,
That's,
I'm
yeah,
so your life must be so awful. Like, for God's sake.
yeah, it's,
And I have these discussions with people all the time because again, back to we don't know how to talk and deal about this. Like,
yeah,
we don't know what to say to people when they say they've experienced a significant loss, and we stick our foot in our mouth and we say stupid things.
yeah, yeah,
And at best, just say, I'm sorry that happened. I can't imagine what you're going through, because you don't know what anybody's feeling. So I have
yeah,
no idea what you're feeling right now.
yeah. That's actually like, honestly, even like politically, that answer should apply. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're going through, because that really is like what I see as a huge problem in the world. And I'm not talking about politics now. I know I
Right.
mentioned it briefly, but literally, like, the problem in our culture, at least, which seems to be spreading across the world,
Mhm.
is that, like, we do not know how to, like, gracefully engage in empathy, in compassion,
Yeah.
in sympathy. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to waste people's time with how different those three words are, but it is interesting that, like, we kind of use them interchangeably in American culture, and I sort of
Mhm.
wish we didn't, but I also sort of understand why. But
Yeah.
well, thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for
Yeah.
telling our audience, because I think it really does help people understand something. And in addition to that, do you think now in the future you're gonna deal with the next one better and differently? And you know what I mean by that? Not like,
Yeah.
it's not specific, but just like,
Like my own losses.
yeah, yeah, meaning
Okay.
uh unless there's a miracle beyond miracles or a horrible tragedy of, like, some weird
Right.
sort, you're not going to be the last or the first person that you love who's going to pass,
Yeah.
but as long
Okay.
as you're still the alive one,
Yeah.
now you have a taste of the thing that some people go
Mhm.
all the I know I have friends who have never lost anyone. I have friends in their 40s who have
Same.
never, and
Same.
I almost feel sorry for them. I also don't, obviously, but so yeah, you now can answer. You know what I'm trying
Yeah,
to get
that
at.
that first one's always the roughest. And
Yeah, yeah,
that said though, is when you've experienced a significant loss, the next ones aren't necessarily going to be easier, but they're going to be different,
mhm,
and they're going to land different, right? And I guess you could say they might be easier, but they might not be. I have a feeling I had a very different relationship with my brother than I do with my parents. Obviously, he and I did not have the greatest relationship, to be honest about it. And I'm super close with my parents. And when the time comes, again, assuming everything goes the way it naturally should, they will go before me, and that's gonna be much harder on me than my brother's death. So, I at least knowing what I know about grief and about loss and understanding that whatever I'm gonna go through is gonna be normal and okay, that does help. That makes it easier on me, so I don't have those moments where I feel like I'm a little relieved they're gone. I'm not like, "Oh my god, I'm crazy. I'm a horrible human being for saying that." I don't have to worry about the guilt with any of my emotions because I know that they're valid, if that
yeah.
answers your question.
No, it definitely does. It definitely does. And I feel like a lot of what I'm trying to ask you is, like, to for my audience to get like not free advice, like I'm not trying to like do but like literally just to give people a starter kit of like
Sure.
where they're headed. So that would kind of segue backwards into like the other thing you mentioned, which is someone kind of does have to take the reins in a family death.
Mhm.
Like when my dad's health was getting worse, my mom and I were starting to have those awkward conversations, and it was very clear that like one of us should take the lead and then comfort
Mhm.
the other. And it was like my brother lives in New York, so he was not on the table for that job. I live local. My mom and dad are here, and luckily for the audience listening, my dad's health is doing great right now, and everything's like for the time being okay. But it's still, we had the mini emergency. It was a view of what we all know is going to happen, not the
Yeah.
way he's going to go, but just that like um get the estate together, like all that kind of stuff. And my parents hate when I talk about them on this podcast, so I feel so guilty right now. Mom, I feel guilty if you're listening to this. Dad, you don't care, but I still feel guilty. But I'm helping people. So I love screaming at a microphone as if that is the only way my parents are going to hear me. But so I am curious, like, is step one like hire a death doula for the whole family and then take the reins and deal with, like, how would you suggest in that situation? Because like I said, someone does have to.
Yeah. I mean, it's in a lot of every family dynamic's going to be different, but there's always that one person that's kind of the one central person that keeps everything together. So it always falls on their shoulders. And to that person, I would say, for the love of God, reach out for help. It's okay. Don't try to shoulder everybody's grief on top of your grief, on top of the logistics, on top of the to-do lists and all of the things that need done. Get help. Like, and I don't mean get help like therapist or get see a therapist, but just ask for help. If it's a death doula, if it's your best friend, if it's a pastor, a chaplain, whoever, ask for help. For sure, because nobody should have to shoulder everything alone. That's not fair to anybody.
And
So
do you think we're I am optimistic, so there's a leading question, I guess, but do you think we're getting better at dealing with death as a culture, especially with Gen Z in mind, who you said is your second most?
Um, not yet, but we are on the cusp.
Okay.
I would say we're at least we're at that point where we understand there's a problem and what the problem is, and we are now working towards trying to fix it or work around it so it's not the problem that it used to be. So I'd say we're right on that line, and I think grief is a good part of that too because we're starting to now acknowledge more of what grief is. And that, it's not a somebody died, you can take 3 days off work and then everything has to go back to normal. I think we all recognize that grief is something that's going to continue on forever. Like it never goes away. It just changes form. And yeah.
Yeah, you've just touched the most awkward subject of my life, which is I was a vice principal of a school, and I would
Mhm.
like all my teachers wanted to use mental health to get out of work when they wanted to get out of work. And at some point I had to be a total hard ass to them and myself and say, like, look, guys, we're all in this together, but like this is a school and students need
Yeah.
teachers. So like at because I do feel like this is a bubbling conversation that's going to come up in the future with Gen
Yeah.
Z specifically, which is like
Yeah.
you can't just not do something you promise to do, but also
Right.
you can't be beholden to a promise more than your own dignity and self-esteem.
Sure. There's a balance in that. Like there's a balance in everything. There's no black and white to really anything.
Mhm.
And like, yeah, we can't just ignore all our feelings and be beholden to all the tasks we have to do. But we also have to recognize that there are things that we are responsible for, you know. Like if I had a child and my spouse died, I would still have to be that child's mother. Yeah, I would be torn apart that my spouse was gone. But the end of the day, I still have to feed and care for my child. So not all things are that severe, but there are certain things that you do have to do at some point, and not to be said it can't be done with grace, and you can't have people around you support you and try to help you with whatever it needs done. But if there are things that people are expecting of you, there's a way to find a balance, I guess
Mhm.
is my polite way of saying that.
Yeah, no, that's good. The next question is more of a levity-driven question.
Okay.
One of my jobs, one of my careers in my life has been indexing books, and 9 times out of 10, people have not only not heard of that, but they then want to ask me like a ton of questions. So
Okay.
I've learned the hard way that if I'm on an airplane and I don't want to talk to the person next to me, never tell them the truth about that job. Just what
Okay.
do you do for a living? I am a paleontologist. Like something, just pick something boring that you don't think people are going to talk about. Do you A, have any like absurd or weird reactions when you say like you're a death doula? Do people like clutch their pearls and like freak out? A and B, like, are there days where you just don't want to explain it to people, so you lie or just like dismiss the question?
Uh, so I tend to get two very distinct responses. One is, "Oh my God, that's beautiful. You're a saint." I'm like, No, I am not. Um, thank you, but no, that triggers my imposter syndrome too. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, totally.
I either get that or a, oh, and then a quick way to get away from me. Those two, or of course the obvious, what the hell is a death
Yeah, yeah,
doula?
yeah.
um,
Followed by
I
one of
I
those two.
yeah,
Yeah.
overall, I love talking about what I do. So I very rarely lie, but I mean, there are days where I'm just out of spoons or I'm just checked out and somebody asks and I'm like, I'll just say like, oh, I work in hospice, or which I don't. I
Mhm.
don't really. I work with hospice in a way, but or I have part-time jobs. I'll just mention one of my part-time
Cool.
jobs and then just leave it at that.
That's awesome. I'm glad I asked that because I am curious, and I especially just feel like because it goes back to why America is so weird about this subject. But like, I mean,
Mhm.
God, the number,
It
even
is.
just saying like I volunteered in hospice, they're like volunteer, like they're like more offended that I
Yeah.
wasn't taking
You
money for
did
it.
that on
Yeah.
purpose?
And then also the imposter thing, like, well, I did it because I was going through grief and I wanted to help
Yeah,
others because I think that's one of the paths of like,
absolutely.
yeah. So it's just funny though because like I think there are saints. I do think there are people out there who like are saints, but I think that
Mhm.
dealing with death and dealing with grief and stuff is like
Yeah.
not, you don't need to be a saint to do it, but it is
Yeah.
it speaks volumes about our culture that that would be one of the reactions, you know?
Yeah, exactly. The fact
Yeah.
that you would consider somebody who's doing something we all just used to do naturally is now suddenly like a saint. Like,
Yeah.
no, nope, I'm just doing what people have been doing for millennia.
And it's funny because I watch children. I drop my children off at a preschool, and like I already am playing that game where I'm like, oh, I bet like that little girl's gonna be a doctor. This one's like, because you just see them like what they're playing with. But it would be funny if
Yeah.
we lived in a future society where someone's like, that girl's clearly a death doula. Like she's she's like helping the child deal with a fake baby's death or something.
Yeah.
Like pretend games or something.
Well, when
Yeah.
I started my business as a death doula, I was telling my friends on Facebook and telling all my friends and family, like, I'm going to do this. And the most of the response I got was, oh, yeah, which is, I worked in IT for like 15 years. I went to school for theater. I'm like, I'm going to be a death doula. They're like, oh, yeah, okay. Like, nobody was shocked.
That's awesome. I hope you go to your high school reunion, whatever the next one is, and that you can like poll the responses or something because that is like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Keep a little
like
list of what people say.
the most likely is like most likely to become a death doula. um, and also there's I am a writer, so I thought a great TV sitcom that I was gonna maybe write and pitch would be like a hospice drama. And
Ooh,
every week the cameo is the patient. So like a celebrity gets to be the patient who got admitted to the ward and then dies at the end of
love
the
that.
episode. And it's a
I love
comedy.
it.
So I think Death Doula would be a recurring, like you'd be a like one of the characters in it, like
Oh,
like a
yeah,
fixer. Yeah.
absolutely.
So that's cool. I like that. I did promise that I would ask you about a spiritual thing. I'm gonna
Oh,
actually let you have two because you did say clients too. So if you have
okay.
a really juicy good one that's someone else's, I'm gonna allow for that. So you can tell
Okay.
one, two, or
Mhm.
two, or yeah. So
Yeah.
your own or someone else's or both.
Okay, so I have a great one of my own.
All right.
This happened just like maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago for no reason. Like I said, my brother's been gone about 10 years now. And for no reason at all, he just was in my head again. I just could not stop thinking about him. And I was like starting to get a little, I don't want to say obsessed, but just like really conscious of the fact that he was in my head a lot. I'm like, is he trying to tell me something? Like, what is going on? And I was like, I don't know, maybe I should talk to a psychic or I don't know. So I'm thinking all these thoughts at home one night and it's just really stuck in my head. And I was texting my husband who was at work. And I was just like, I don't know what's going on. I just can't stop thinking about my brother. Like I feel like he's trying to tell me something. And I mentioned his mother-in-law died the same year my brother did. It was just a few months ahead of time. And he was like, "Hey, would you run up in my office?" I thought he was blowing me off at first. He's like, "Would you run up to my office at home? And on the table right inside the door, there's a little clip light. Would you tell me if it's turned on?" And I was like, "Oh, God, whatever." So I go up. I'm like, "Yeah, it's on." He goes, "Yeah, that just turned on the other day, and I can't turn it off." And that was a gift from my mother.
Wow.
And he was like, I think they're both trying to say something to us, Nikki. And I'm like, and I still don't know what it was, but
Oh no! I'm sorry.
I
Oh,
know. I think it was just they were tapping us on the shoulder to say we're still here.
yeah. Maybe that. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, or part of them is still around. But I also I was in a group like psychic reading type situation, and I have never felt the presence of any of my deceased relatives. I've never felt like they were trying to tell me. Just never felt that. And I believe in psychics. I believe there are people that can talk to spirits and energies that in other realms that we don't know about. But I've just never felt like I've had any of that. And because I've never once felt contacted by anybody, but I was in a reading and she kept looking at me and she said, "I'm sorry, there's somebody standing behind you." And I'm like, okay. And she said, you know, was your maternal grandmother's name? And it was something close to my maternal grandmother's name. And I had never met this woman. And I'm like, yes. She's like, well, she's standing behind you. And I was like, my maternal grandmother was incredibly shy. She would never speak. She would never put herself in a room full of a bunch of people. She never talked to a room full of a bunch of people. She's like, she's back there insistent that you listen to her. And I'm like, oh my God, what is it? She just wants you to know that she's really proud of you. She knows that you have followed a completely different path from the family, which is true, and that what you're doing is meaningful to her and to all of your ancestors before them. And she feels that you are ending a long line of trauma. And I was just like, what?
Wow.
Because I'm still like I was really not put off, but I was shocked by that because like, my grandmother would never speak up to strangers that I know of anyway. But to hear that I just burst into tears at that moment. I was like, oh, okay. So those are two. You're welcome.
That's great, and that's really powerful. And it's like this just keeps occurring to me as I watch people like be so petty about so many different things in our culture and the larger world. Is that we only exist because we stand on the shoulders of giants. You know, like the people who came before us, like made it easier and easier and easier. Like we're all 4 generations removed from people who are like worried about wolves coming into their town and eating them. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
You know, and now we're like, Instagram's not working. Like, you know, it's just like, so it's just like, because the line to end the trauma, like that really means something to me, because that is something I've been just trying to figure out. Like you, I can't fit in, you know, I just can't like, I tried so hard to do like regular jobs and do things, and I'm just like a part-time everything. And like, so it's cool. That story resonated with me specifically very deeply. So thank you. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
As you know, because you listen to the show, you get the floor at the end of the interview. What would you like to tell our audience? No time limit.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I know my website you said at the beginning. So if you want to find me, it's nikkithedeathdoula.com. And if I could just say one thing, it's how I end I have a podcast called Good Grief, Nikki the Death Doula.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have promoted that. I'm very
that's
sorry.
okay.
Yeah,
that's okay. Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula. But I end every single episode of my podcast with, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck.
Thank you, Nikki Smith. Thank you to all the listeners of Coffin Talk. As always, you can head over to mikeyop.com and you can support the show through numerous methods on that website. But also, I would be remiss not mentioning a third time. Please check out Nikki Smith, the Death Doula, and also please check out her podcast. Once again, you have been listening to Coffin Talk. My name is Mike Oppenheim. We will see you soon.